In the summer of 1943, as World War II raged across the Pacific, a new and unfamiliar journey awaited dozens of Japanese soldiers captured in the battles overseas. Stripped of their weapons and sent far from home, they found themselves transported not to a prison camp surrounded by barbed wire in some distant exotic land, but to the rolling plains of Nebraska, America's agricultural heartland. For soldiers who had grown up in crowded islands, navigating mountains, rice paddies, and the uncertainty of constant war, the vast open fields stretching endlessly under the Midwestern sky were both mesmerizing and bewildering. The POWs arrived by train, their first glimpse of the heartland framed by endless fields of corn and wheat, punctuated by the silhouettes of silos and barns. The train screeched to a stop at small towns they had never imagined existed. To them, the landscape seemed surreal, flat, empty, yet filled with strange mechanical sounds that hinted at power and productivity unlike anything they had seen. The air smelled of fresh earth and growing crops, a sharp contrast to the smoke, salt water, and gunpowder of the Pacific Islands they had known. Upon arrival, they were met by American guards, who, despite the tensions of war, were often surprised at how calm the soldiers appeared. The Japanese POWs, though wary and cautious, were deeply observant, taking in the farmhouses, wooden fences, and curious townsfolk who watched from a distance. It was a world apart from the islands they had fought and been captured on, a world of silence interrupted only by the low hum of distant tractors and the occasional crow of a rooster. The prisoners were assigned to work on local farms as part of the U.S. government's effort to replace labor lost to the draft. Initially, many were hesitant, uncertain whether this was a trick or some form of punishment. The Americans they met were often bewildered themselves, trying to balance strict oversight with humane treatment mandated by the Geneva Conventions. They quickly realized, however, that these prisoners were disciplined and eager to follow instructions, though the cultural and language barrier made every task a delicate negotiation. For the Japanese soldiers, farm life was a shock. The sheer scale of American farms, the machinery, and the efficiency with which crops were tended was astonishing. They had seen farming in Japan, but it was small plots worked by hand or with rudimentary tools, nothing like the mechanical power they now encountered. Fields stretched for miles, tilled and sown with methods that seemed almost industrial. Even the simplest chores, like gathering hay or tending to livestock, carried lessons in scale and organization that they had never imagined. Yet, beyond the initial labor and adaptation, there was an underlying curiosity that colored every day. The POWs were constantly asking questions, silently observing, and trying to understand the American way of life. They marveled at the size of barns, the abundance of grain, and the innovations that made work efficient. Every tractor, every plow, every mechanical device became a source of fascination and occasionally unease. They had been trained for war, to expect weapons and danger, but instead they were faced with machines that moved the earth and harvested crops with frightening speed and strength. Even the local townspeople contributed to this cultural shock. Children stared, farmers waved cautiously, and the occasional local journalist came to document this unusual aspect of the war, captured soldiers working the land in the middle of America. For the POWs, each encounter was a puzzle. Were these people friends, enemies, or simply civilians caught in the vast machinery of the American war effort? Their instinct for caution never fully left them, but slowly a tentative rhythm began to emerge, a pattern of work, observation, and adaptation. The first days in Nebraska were also a mental exercise. The Japanese soldiers were grappling with the distance from home, the knowledge of ongoing battles in the Pacific, and the surreal calm of American farms. Each sunrise over the flat fields brought with it both hope and anxiety. They were alive, fed, and working, but they were prisoners.
Yet paradoxically, the very freedom to walk among the fields, to see the sky stretch uninterrupted, became one of the most profound challenges to their preconceptions. It was a land without immediate danger, yet full of unfamiliarity, and their disciplined minds could not entirely reconcile the two. These first impressions would set the tone for their experience in Nebraska. From the rolling plains to the mechanical marvels they were about to encounter, the POW's journey was one of observation, adaptation, and gradual understanding. The heartland was no battlefield, yet it demanded a different kind of discipline. In a strange twist of fate, these captured soldiers would learn lessons not about warfare, but about productivity, innovation, and the vastness of a world far beyond their islands. Every field they crossed, every machine they saw, was preparing them for the moment when the most astonishing encounter would come, the sight of a combine harvester, a machine so alien that it would challenge their imagination and redefine their sense of danger.
Life on the Nebraska farms was unlike anything the Japanese POWs had ever experienced. They were used to compact island fields, terraced rice paddies, and labor that demanded endurance rather than machinery. Suddenly, they were thrust into vast stretches of farmland that seemed endless, where crops grew in uniform rows and machines moved with power and precision that no human could match. Their first task was simple in theory: help with the planting and harvesting, feed livestock, and maintain the fields. In practice, every movement required adaptation to scale, unfamiliar tools, and new routines. The POWs quickly learned that American farms relied on more than just human labor. Tractors, threshers, and plows dominated the landscape, replacing the handheld tools they had known. At first, the soldiers approached these machines with caution. They had been trained to fight, not to cultivate, and the hum of engines reminded them of artillery more than farm work. Some thought the vehicles were strange weapons, their massive wheels and rotating blades a potential threat. But under the careful guidance of local farmers, the POWs began to understand the purpose of these machines, marveling at their efficiency while remaining wary of their power. Daily routines were rigorous but structured. Morning light would see the POWs spread across fields, hauling feed for animals, repairing fences, and observing crops. The farmers, many of whom had sons at war, approached the work with a mixture of curiosity and caution. They were learning about the prisoners just as the prisoners were learning about the land. Despite language barriers, gestures and demonstrations conveyed instructions. The soldiers proved remarkably quick to adapt, their disciplined approach to any task showing through, whether raking hay or guiding draft horses through plowed soil. Food and accommodations were another eye-opener. The POWs, accustomed to limited rations in camps and combat zones, were astonished at the abundance of American agriculture. Milk, eggs, fresh vegetables, and hearty bread became staples in their daily meals, though cultural differences often made them cautious about trying new foods. They began to understand, slowly, that the farmers were not only providing work but sustaining life, and that this unusual balance of freedom within captivity was unlike anything they had experienced in a wartime setting. Cultural and environmental shocks were constant. The wide open spaces, the sudden gusts of wind across flat fields, and the endless rows of corn and wheat all challenged their perception of scale. Small tasks took on new meaning. Where one could walk 10 paces across a rice paddy in Japan, here 10 paces barely scratched the surface of a single row of corn. They began to measure distance and time differently, to adapt to the rhythm of mechanized farm work rather than the cycles of tides and seasons they had known. The social dynamics of the farms were also complex. Farmers had to supervise the POWs while maintaining distance, balancing authority with respect for Geneva Convention standards. Meanwhile, the POWs had to navigate obedience, self-respect, and the subtle cues of trust and expectation.
Despite the potential for tension, stories began to emerge of shared moments of understanding. A POW showing skill with a horse, a farmer demonstrating how to adjust a plow, or a shared meal at dusk could bridge gaps of language and culture in ways that wartime training had never prepared them for. Animals played a surprisingly significant role. Feeding cows, chickens, and pigs was more than chore. It was a lesson in responsibility, observation, and empathy. The POWs watched carefully how each animal behaved, noting reactions and adjusting their actions. Horses, especially, demanded patience and precision, and for many prisoners, learning to guide a powerful draft horse through a field was a test of control, coordination, and focus. The satisfaction of mastering these tasks, however small, provided psychological relief from the tension of captivity. Weather dictated the pace of work and life on the farm. Blistering sun, sudden rain showers, and unexpected cold snaps shaped each day. Unlike the island climate they were used to, the plains of Nebraska could be harsh and unpredictable. Yet the farmers relied on their prisoners to maintain the rhythm of planting, tending, and harvesting regardless of conditions. POWs adapted, learning quickly how to work efficiently while maintaining energy, a lesson in resilience they had acquired during combat but applied now in a very different environment. Language barriers created both tension and humor. Misunderstood words led to mistakes in harvesting or feeding, but also moments of laughter as gestures and demonstrations became their universal language. A wrong signal could result in a wheelbarrow tipping over or livestock scattering. Yet each error became a small lesson in adaptation. Gradually, the POWs gained confidence, anticipating needs, learning sequences of work, and even predicting the actions of the farmers they worked alongside. By the end of the first weeks, the POWs had begun to internalize the rhythms of farm life. The daily routines, the reliance on machines, and the sheer scale of American agriculture transformed their perception of the world. Work was still work, but it carried new meaning. Each day they gained more understanding of the efficiency, power, and ingenuity behind these farms. They were no longer simply prisoners, they were participants in a system of production so alien, so massive, and so controlled that it seemed almost otherworldly. And then, one day, they saw something that would forever redefine their understanding of American technology, a machine that moved the land and harvested crops with terrifying efficiency. It was a sight that filled them with awe, confusion, and a lingering sense of danger. They would come to call it a war machine, and this encounter would become the story that historians would recount for decades, highlighting the intersection of war, technology, and cultural perception in a quiet corner of Nebraska.
It was a bright morning on the Nebraska plains when the Japanese POWs first encountered the combine harvester. From a distance, it looked like a massive, rumbling machine, its metal blades glinting in the sun, and its enormous wheels crushing the earth as it moved forward. The soldiers froze, their eyes widening in disbelief. To men who had been trained to see machines as instruments of war, this mechanical marvel seemed like a terrifying weapon, a machine designed to destroy. They could hardly imagine that its purpose was to harvest wheat. The farmers, accustomed to these machines, called it routine work. They climbed onto the harvester, adjusted levers, and guided it through the fields with ease. For them, it was just another day of bringing in the harvest, a vital task to ensure the nation's food supply. But for the POWs, it was incomprehensible. The roar of the engine, the spinning blades, and the way it moved so quickly through the crops seemed almost supernatural. Whispers passed between the men. Is it a weapon? Could it shoot? Does it belong to the army? Their imagination, shaped by years of war and combat training, could not process that a machine of such size and apparent power was harmless. The farmers tried to explain.
Gestures, demonstrations, and simple words were all they had to communicate the harvester's function. One man motioned to the spinning blades and then pointed at the harvested grain falling into the collection bin. Another mimed the movement of reaping and threshing. Slowly, the POWs began to understand its purpose, but even then, a part of their mind remained convinced that it was something designed to dominate, to conquer, to kill. It was so unlike anything they had ever seen that comprehension lagged behind observation. Their reactions were a mixture of fear, fascination, and awe. Some soldiers circled the machine cautiously, measuring its size with their eyes. Others hesitated to step too close, afraid that a wrong move might trigger some hidden mechanism. A few bold individuals approached and examined the wheels and blades, noting the complexity and precision of the engineering. Their military training had prepared them to analyze enemy technology, to find weaknesses, to anticipate use in combat. But this machine confounded them entirely. There was nothing to fear, nothing to shoot, nothing to evade, yet their instincts were on high alert. The farmers, meanwhile, watched this reaction with mild amusement. They had seen foreigners startled by large farm equipment before, but never with such intensity. They encouraged the POWs to touch the machine, to run it under supervision, to understand that it was merely a tool. Slowly, some prisoners began to climb aboard, tentative and cautious, gripping levers as if they were holding a rifle. The first movements of the harvester under their control were jerky, hesitant, yet the mechanical marvel responded with smooth precision. They realized that this was not a weapon, but a means to achieve productivity unimaginable by manual labor alone. Observing the harvested crops, the POWs were struck by the efficiency. Rows of wheat, which would have taken dozens of men hours to cut by hand, disappeared under the whirring blades in minutes. Grain collected, threshed, and separated with mechanical precision. The soldiers could not help but compare this to their own experiences in war. Armies that had taken weeks to achieve objectives through sheer manpower now seemed slow, inefficient, and primitive compared to the mechanical speed of this harmless farming machine. Despite their growing understanding, some suspicion lingered. Every detail, the engine, the spinning cutter, and the collected grain seemed exaggerated in their eyes. They had been conditioned to see danger in motion, in sound, and in size. This machine ticked all the boxes of something powerful, and yet it was producing food. It was a paradox that challenged their assumptions about technology, war, and power. As the day progressed, the POWs rotated shifts to operate the harvester under supervision. Fear slowly gave way to fascination. They watched how the farmers anticipated mechanical needs, how minor adjustments could prevent jams, and how a single operator could control such a vast machine. The practical lessons were immense: observation, patience, and the subtle interplay between human skill and mechanical power. For the Japanese soldiers, it was a form of education unlike any they had received, training in efficiency and precision without the threat of bullets or bombs. As the day progressed, the POWs gathered to watch the machine rest after a day's work. Some discussed its function, comparing it to weapons, acknowledging the irony that a device of productivity had initially inspired fear greater than any gun. They laughed quietly at their own reactions, reflecting on how imagination shaped perception, especially when conditioned by years of war. This harvester, a simple American tool, had revealed not just technological prowess, but also the limits of their wartime assumptions. The combine harvester became a symbol for the Nebraska experience. It was a bridge between fear and understanding, war and peace, captivity and learning. It reminded the POWs that power did not always take the form of destruction, and skill and technology could create rather than destroy. They would carry this lesson with them long after leaving Nebraska, a vivid memory of surprise, awe, and the strange intersection of war and agriculture.
Life on the Nebraska farms brought the Japanese POWs into close contact not only with machinery and agriculture, but also with the peculiarities of American culture. Many of the interactions were simple, practical, and often unintentionally humorous. Language barriers made ordinary instructions seem mysterious, and gestures that were perfectly clear to an American farmer could be misinterpreted in ways that sparked laughter or confusion. A farmer pointing at a tractor could be seen as signaling a threat. A simple hand wave might be interpreted as a command to follow or even attack. Mealtime often highlighted these differences. POWs were presented with foods they had never encountered: corn on the cob, fresh milk, bread baked in ovens, and even sweet desserts. Some hesitated to eat unfamiliar dishes, suspicious of their purpose or taste. Others tried and found joy in the flavors, sometimes leading to exaggerated reactions of delight or confusion that amused the farmers. Small incidents like misusing a fork or attempting to pour milk incorrectly became shared moments of levity, bridging a gap that words could not easily cross. Work tasks also produced unintended comedy. A simple chore as moving hay could become a spectacle. One soldier might misinterpret a gesture and toss a bale in the wrong direction, causing a pile to collapse. Another might attempt to mimic a farmer's technique with a plow, only to end up tangled in ropes or slipping in mud. These accidents were harmless, yet they highlighted the challenges of adapting to unfamiliar tools and methods. Farmers, initially stern and serious, began to laugh along, appreciating the resilience and effort of the POWs despite the mishaps. Animals became a source of constant amazement and occasional panic. Chickens darted unpredictably, cows refused to cooperate, and horses required patience and skill to guide properly. POWs sometimes reacted as if the animals were part of a cunning trap or enemy force. A cow kicking out unexpectedly or a horse spooked by sudden noise might prompt exaggerated defensive maneuvers from the prisoners, further increasing the humor of the scene. These moments taught patience, improvisation, and an appreciation for the rhythm of farm life. Cultural norms and etiquette also came into play. POWs were accustomed to strict hierarchical and formal interactions, whereas Americans treated many daily interactions with casual familiarity. Greeting a farmer politely, refusing food, or following instructions required careful observation and adjustment. The prisoners often learned the hard way that what seemed respectful in their culture could be misunderstood, while seemingly casual or relaxed gestures by Americans could appear strange or even threatening. Over time, both sides began to adapt, creating a subtle understanding and shared sense of humor that eased daily life. Festivities and local traditions further highlighted cultural differences. When the farm hosted small gatherings or children visited, the POWs were baffled by songs, games, and folk customs. They attempted to participate, often clumsily, but their efforts were met with gentle amusement. These small moments of cultural exchange provided relief from the monotony of work and the underlying tension of captivity. They allowed prisoners to see Americans as people rather than simply guards or supervisors. The combine harvester itself continued to inspire awe and humor. Even after learning its purpose, the POWs often exaggerated its abilities in conversation among themselves, imagining it as a mechanical warrior capable of devouring entire fields or defeating armies. This running joke became part of the camp's informal culture, a way to process the absurdity of their situation and to create a mental escape from the rigors of labor. Language lessons emerged naturally from these interactions. While formal classes were minimal, the necessity of communication encouraged both POWs and farmers to develop a basic shared vocabulary. Misunderstandings, while frequent, became a teaching tool. Farmers would demonstrate tools repeatedly,
using gestures and mimicry, and POWs would respond with questions and cautious imitation. Over time, these small exchanges fostered mutual respect and occasional camaraderie, with humor smoothing the edges of unfamiliarity. Perhaps most importantly, humor provided a coping mechanism. The POWs were far from home, in a country they had been taught to view as enemy territory, yet the levity of daily life allowed them to preserve mental resilience. Laughter over a misfired wheelbarrow, a spilled bucket of milk, or an overenthusiastic animal created bonds, eased anxiety, and offered a rare sense of normalcy. Humor became a bridge between worlds, demonstrating that even in captivity, humanity and joy could survive. By the end of this chapter of their experience, the POWs had learned more than farming. They had gained insight into American behavior, ingenuity, and the flexibility of human interaction. The lessons were subtle: understanding through observation, patience in unfamiliar circumstances, and the recognition that laughter could transcend language and culture. These small, humorous moments became some of the most enduring memories of their time in Nebraska, and they would carry these stories home as a testament to the unexpected ways that war and peace could intertwine.
As the months passed, the Japanese POWs began to reflect on their time in Nebraska with a mixture of astonishment, amusement, and a deep sense of learning. The vast plains, the rhythm of farm life, and the strange, powerful machines like the combine harvester had left an indelible impression. For men who had known only islands, battlefields, and the constant tension of war, the Midwest represented something entirely new, a land of abundance, organization, and technological ingenuity that seemed almost surreal. Many of the POWs remarked quietly to each other about the scale of American agriculture. Fields stretched farther than their eyes could follow. Crops were tended with precision and speed, and every task seemed designed for maximum efficiency. They had observed machines that could cut, thresh, and collect in minutes what once took dozens of men hours to accomplish. The experience impressed upon them the connection between innovation and productivity, and how human ingenuity could shape the land and sustain entire communities. The cultural exchanges, often humorous or awkward, left a lasting impact as well. The POWs had learned to navigate differences in behavior, speech, and expectations. They discovered that patience, observation, and cautious adaptation were just as critical in understanding a new culture as they were in surviving battle. They also saw firsthand how trust could grow even in unusual circumstances, through shared labor, small gestures of kindness, and the universal language of laughter. For the Americans, the experience was equally illuminating. Farmers and townspeople learned that the POWs were not the caricatures of the enemy often portrayed in propaganda. They were disciplined, intelligent, and capable of adapting to entirely new situations. Their time on the farms challenged stereotypes and created a more nuanced understanding of the human beings on the other side of the war. The interaction revealed that even in conflict, empathy and cooperation were possible, and that ordinary life could bridge the divide created by global warfare. The combine harvester, which had initially sparked fear and amazement, became a symbol of the POW's transformation. Once viewed as a monstrous war machine, it was now understood as a tool of creation, of sustenance, and of efficiency. This shift in perception highlighted the broader lesson of their experience. Not every powerful machine or unfamiliar object was meant to harm. Some were designed to aid, to build, and to cultivate, even in ways that the soldiers' wartime mindset initially prevented them from comprehending. As they prepared to leave Nebraska, many POWs carried with them memories of friendships, lessons in agriculture, and a newfound appreciation for the complexity of American life.
The small towns, the endless fields, the rhythm of daily work, and the humor that had softened cultural misunderstandings, all of these combined to form a unique education that went far beyond the classroom or battlefield. They had learned about human ingenuity, patience, resilience, and the surprising intersections of war, labor, and culture. Historians today look back on these Nebraska POW camps as a remarkable example of how captivity can lead to cultural exchange and personal growth. The camps were designed to alleviate labor shortages during wartime, but they inadvertently created spaces where observation, learning, and adaptation flourished. The Japanese soldiers returned home not just as prisoners, but as witnesses to an unexpected facet of American life, its technological progress, its work ethic, and the ability of its people to treat even captives with a degree of dignity and respect. The experience also left a legacy in memory and storytelling. POWs recounted tales of fear and fascination, of mistakes and laughter, and of machines that seemed like monsters only to reveal their true purpose. These stories provide historians, educators, and students with a vivid window into the human side of war, illustrating how perception, imagination, and culture shape our understanding of the unfamiliar. The combine harvester became more than a machine. It became a metaphor for the transformative power of curiosity and learning. In the end, the POW's time in Nebraska was a quiet but profound chapter of World War II history. It showed that even in captivity, growth and understanding were possible. It highlighted how human beings, despite conflict and language barriers, could adapt, cooperate, and even find humor in the most unexpected circumstances. The lessons extended far beyond the farms, influencing how future generations thought about cultural exchange, empathy, and the interplay between technology and perception. As they returned to Japan, these soldiers carried with them more than survival. They carried perspective, stories, and memories that contrasted sharply with the violence and fear of battlefields. They had experienced America not as an enemy, but as a complex, industrious, and sometimes humorous society. And in that, they found lessons that would endure long after the war had ended, shaping not only their own understanding of the world, but also the way history remembers this unusual, fascinating chapter of human experience.